Hi, my name is Bob. I'm the author of the Jetzig web framework. Today we're going to be looking at Jetzig's new database layer, JetQuery, and we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to create a simple blogging application. So the first thing we need to do is, of course, make sure you have Zig. So go to ziglang.org/download and make sure that you've got that installed. And then once you've done that, go to the Jetzig website, jetzig.dev, go to the Downloads tab, and then you can choose the distribution appropriate for your operating system. If you prefer to build from source, then you can follow the instructions below. I'm running Linux, so I'm going to download that one, and then I'm going to download that into my project directory, and then I'm going to unzip that, and then once that's done, I need to chmod the Jetzig command to give it executable permissions, and then I'm going to move that into my home bin so that it's available in my path. So now I can just run the Jetzig command to verify that that's worked. Cool. So we're going to create a new project. We're going to use Jetzig init to do that. We're going to call it my blog. So that's going to create a new directory in the current directory called my blog, create some empty source files or some default source files, and give us some instructions to start the server. So we'll go into the my blog directory. We're going to run a Jetzig server. This is identical to Zig build run, but it passes a couple of extra development flags, and it also restarts the server whenever source files are changed. So it just makes development a little bit nicer. Okay, so we'll have a look at some of the files that's created here. So config database.zig. So we're using the null adapter at the moment, and this is if you don't need to use a database in your application, you can leave it as this. We're going to use Postgres today, so we're going to remove that. As you can see here, you can also configure by environment variables. As long as the adapter is comp time known, then all of the other values can be runtime known. And if you want to specify a .env file as well, then that will also be loaded on server startup. So we'll uncomment the default configuration. And for the development database, we're just going to hardcode these values because it's only running in a local development database. And of course, in production, you'd want to remove these and load them from your environment. Okay, so we'll save that, and then we'll go and start a new server, a new database server. So I'm going to use Docker to start a database. So if you look at my basic Docker compose file, it's just running Postgres 16 with the credentials that we specified before. So I do Docker compose up. That just starts up my local development database. And we'll have a quick look at the Jetzig application just to see what we've got. So we've got the default splash screen, nothing really too interesting to look at here, but it just shows that everything's ready to go. So we need to create a couple of things here. We need to create a view to generate the routes and give us a place to actually implement the functionality that we want. And we need to modify the database. We're going to do that with some database migrations. So we'll go through those one by one now. So first of all, we'll create the view, Jetzig G for generate. You can do generate or G, view, and we'll call it blogs. And we only want a few endpoints here. We don't want all of them, so we don't need put and patch and so on. So we're just going to do index, get, new, post, and that will create those 4 endpoints for us. It needs to be in the my blog project directory. We'll run that again. There we go. Okay, so it's created 4 templates, 1 for each action, and it's created the view as well, blogs.zig. Okay, cool. So we'll have a quick look at that now. So we've got index, get, new, and post. And if we go to index.simple, then you can see that we've got some default content here. So index doesn't receive an ID, get does, and this will load a specific item. But the others, new and post, there's no ID relevant to them. So for example, if I go to /blog/123, this will load get, and then this just loads the default content. So if you look at get.simple, content goes here. So everything's all connected there. It's just not displaying anything specific at the moment because we haven't connected everything up. So now we can do the database side of things. So we'll use the CLI to do that as well. So you can do Jetzig G migration, and we're going to call our migration create blogs. Now, if you prefer, you can just press enter right now and it will create a default migration for you. Or if you want to, you can also use some of the command line extensions to generate the migration from the command line for typical use cases. So we're going to create a table called blogs, and we're going to create a column called title, and we'll make that a string. And we'll have another column called content, and we'll make that a text column because that's going to be a lot longer. Okay. So we'll run that migration there. We'll have a look and see what it's created. So it's created a file in source app database migrations, and the file is timestamped to the current time. And we've got 2 functions here. We've got up and down, and up is run when a migration is applied, and down is called when a migration is rolled back. So you can see that the down function drops the table and the up function creates the table. So it creates a table called blogs, It's automatically added a primary key for us called ID, and then the 2 columns that we specified, and you can edit this before you run it as you need. And it's also created timestamps. This is going to create 2 columns for us, created at and updated at. Updated at is modified when you update a record, created at is updated when you insert a record into the database. Title is a string, which is just a varchar 255 in Postgres, and content is a text, which is, a very, very long string if we need it. Okay, so we created the migration. If we needed to make any changes here, we could do that. And then we need to actually run the migration, but first we need to create the database. So we don't actually have the database created. We've launched Postgres, but we haven't actually got the database there. So we do database create, and that's going to just do a quick compilation of some of the command line tooling, because it needs to read, the latest config, and creates the database for us. So that's cool. And then we can migrate our database. And this does a few things here. So first, it will create this JetQuery migrations table if it doesn't exist. This keeps track of all of the migrations that have been applied to the database, and this allows you to roll back and prevent reapplying migrations that have already been applied. And then it checks to see if this migration has been applied to the database, and if it hasn't, then it will run the migration, which you can see here it does, create table blogs, and then a couple of indexes on the timestamps columns as well. And then finally, it inserts the migration version into the JetQuery migrations table just to confirm that that has now been applied. Cool, okay. And if we want as well, we can roll back the migration. That drops the table and deletes it from the migrations table, but we actually kind of need that, so we're going to migrate that again there. Cool. Okay, so now we've got the migration applied, we need to define an interface for how we actually use this. Now, if you're familiar with some other ORMs, then you may expect that this happens automatically, that the schema is automatically reflected. If you've used something like Ecto, then maybe you'll be a bit less surprised that we actually need to define a schema. So you can define the schema by hand. The schema exists in source app database schema.zig, but we can actually use the CLI to automatically generate this for us, just to give us a starting point. So we'll do Jetzig database reflect. And it just reads the metadata from the database and then does its best attempt to create the schema. So we'll open up that schema now. There we go. So we've got a blog, and this is a JetQuery model. It references the blogs table, and then the types available on this. There's an ID, which is 932, title, constituate, and so on and so on, slice of constituate. So we've also got created at and updated at. And obviously Zig at the moment at least doesn't have a native datetime type, so JetQuery provides one for you just to give you access to those kinds of data as well. And you'll notice as well that although title and content are different column types on the back end, they both have the same abstract type when you interface with them in Zig, so they're both slices of const U8. Okay, so now that we've got the schema, we've got the views, and we've created the database migrations, and we've run them on the database, it's created those tables. Now we can go into our view, and we can actually start fetching some data. So we'll start with new, and new is obviously when you need to create a new blog entry. So we'll go ahead and edit the new Zimple template here. And we're going to set the action to blogs. And then the method will be post. And then we're just going to add a few simple form elements here. So nothing too fancy, but we'll give it a label, and we'll call this title. And then we'll create an input type of text, and name equals title. And then we'll create another label for the content, and then we'll just do a text area for the content. Cool. And then of course finally we need a submit button. Nice. So now that that's done, we can go into the view function, and we can do some database stuff. So first we need to create a query, and in JetQuery you have complete separation from query generation and query execution. So we use a repo-based architecture. So you generate the query, all of the query is generated at comp time, so all of the SQL leverages a lot of Zig's sort of comp time functionality, and we generate the entire SQL string at comp time. And this gives you some really, really nice benefits. So for example, if you try to select a column that does not exist in this schema, then you get a compile error there. And then if you fetch a result from the database and you try to reference an attribute that is not defined in the schema, you also get a compile time error there as well, which is really, really helpful. And also you have a lot lower risk of any kind of SQL injection attacks if all of your SQL is comp time known and none of that can be generated at runtime. Okay, so we'll first edit the post. So now that we've actually edited the new view, this is going to do a post to blogs. So this doesn't actually need to contain anything. This is just going to render the template. It's just basic HTML. But then in the post, we need to do some work here to actually create some stuff in the database. So first we'll create a query. Jetzig.database.query.blog. And the enum literal that you pass here refers to the constant name that is defined on the schema. So this one here. Okay, it's not the name of the table. And there doesn't actually need to be any correlation between these, but it's recommended you follow that just for convenience. Okay, and we're going to do an insert. So we'll do .insert, and then we're going to do .content equals params.content, and .title equals params.title. Okay, and now we need to create the params. So first we need to create a params type. Okay, so that's our params type, so that's what we're expecting. And then we're going to fetch those params from the request. And if we don't get the matched params, then there's not really much we can do here, so we're just going to do a request.fail unprocessable entity. Cool, so that will just give us a 42 if we don't get the expected params. And you could do something a bit more, helpful if you want, but this is just for demo purposes. Okay, so we're using expect params here, so if we don't get the match, then this returns null. So if we don't receive content and title, which are coercible to strings, then we get a null. And if we do, then we get a type of params back as the params value. And that's why we can just refer to params.content and params.title. So if we reach this point, we know that we've got valid params. Okay, so we've created the query, and now we need to execute it. So in this case, we're just going to do try request.repo.execute. We've got a repo available on every single request. It's already got the database connection ready to go. And we'll just do execute query. Cool. So in this case, we're doing execute, and the return type of execute depends on the type of query that you're executing. If you're doing an insert or an update, there's no return value there because we're not fetching anything from the database. So we don't need to do anything like this because it just returns void. But if you're doing a select or a find or something like that, which we'll get to in a moment, then you actually get a return type here. So just be aware of that when you're executing a query. Okay, so that's finished compiling. So if we go to blogs/new, cool, that's ready to go. Our form is there. And then we're going to put the title in as my blog post. And then we're going to do my blog content. Cool, we'll click submit. And that does an insert. So we've got insert into blogs, content, title, created at, updated at. So like I said, the created at and updated at are automatically applied for us if we have those columns defined in the schema. Okay, so that's being created. And now we're going to go on to the index view. And here we're going to select some values from the database. So we'll do const query equals jetzig.database.query log.select. Now we only want a couple of things here. We don't need everything, so we're just going to do .id and .title. Cool. And then we're going to execute that. So here we're going to use a slightly different way of executing things. So we've got two options. You could do const blogs equals try request.repo execute query. You could do this, and then this actually gives you an iterable result, and then you can iterate over those results one by one. But for simplicity here, we just want all of them. We just want an array of ID and title, objects. So we're just going to fetch all of them using repo.all, and this just makes things a bit easier. Okay, cool. So we've got these, and now we're just going to create some template data. So we'll do var root equals try request.data object. So this is a root object type that we're going to give us, that's going to give us some template data that we can insert into. and then we'll do try root.put blogs, and you can just dump that straight into the template data and it'll automatically be translated into a native symbol type. Cool, okay, so that should give us everything we need in terms of the template, and then we're going to go into the index view and see if we can generate a pretty basic list. So we'll do for blogs, blog, and then we'll just do a div, and then we'll create a link. So we'll do href equals /blogs /blog.id, and then blog.title. Cool. Yeah, that should be good. Okay, so here we've got a for loop. We're using a simple for loop, and this just makes accessing template data a little bit more straightforward. Dollar refers to the root objects, and then we're just looking at .blogs. So this correlates to this, so root.put_blogs. And then we're just iterating over it one by one and generating a link for each one. So that's finished compiling. If we go to the blogs index here, you can see that it selects everything from the database, and it's just selecting the things that we specified, so the ID and the title. And what's really nice about this is that the type is generated dynamically, so depending on the query that you're selecting. It's done at comp time, but it's done dynamically at comp time. So if we were to refer to, for example, if we did blogs 0.content, we would get a compile error here because content does not exist because we haven't selected it. So you get lots and lots of really nice type checks with JetQuery. Okay, so we've got a link. It's going to be the correct link. It's going to go to blogs1, but it's not going to contain any content yet. We need to actually fetch that from the database. So we'll do that here. Const query equals jetzig.database.query blog.find ID. So in this case, ID will be 1, the string 1. JetQuery automatically coerces the values for you, so you don't need to convert this to an int or anything like this. It does that automatically for you and gives you helpful errors if it's an incompatible type. And then we need to execute this query. And in this case, we're using find. This returns just one result. So like I said before, you get a different result type depending on what type of query you're executing. So we're going to execute that query. So it's going to be, in fact, we'll do this as an if because it gives us an optional. So if we're doing find or find by, it gives us one result or null. So it's always an optional in these cases. We just need to use Zig's optional syntax to make sure that we've actually got a value. And it works really well with the the semantics that we're dealing with here with the database. So if try request.repo.execute query, then we get a blog back, else we don't. And in this case, we'll do return request.fail not found. So we're just going to give a 404 in that case. And then we'll put the blog into the template data. So first we'll create some data. So our root equals try request.data object. Put that in. Nice. And then we'll render. Okay. Now we've got both of these branches. We don't need this one down here. Cool. So that should now give us the blog as a template data, and if we don't have it, then we should get a not found. So if we put in a random ID, then we'll get a not found back. So let's go to the get.symbol. Cool. So again, it's just the default content. So let's put some useful content in here. So we'll do an h1. Let's get rid of that. Cool. So we'll do .blog.title. Cool. And the content. Give it some kind of helpful class maybe. Cool. And then we'll do .blog.content. Nice. And then if we save that. So again, this is the root value, the $. And if I go back to here, you can see that in the root value, I've put a blog, and it's the return that I'm getting back from the blog. By default, when you do find, it will select all of the columns. If you want to, you can do select and then specify, some other columns here, but we want all of the columns in this case. We need the full content. And And then yeah, you just dump it straight into the template data, and then that makes it available inside the template. And if we've done everything right and it's finished compiling, yep, cool, then we should hopefully see a blog. There we go. So we've got some blog content here. So we're just gonna go to new, and typically you put some like links to all of this stuff so that you've got some nice stuff. And we're just gonna do a spam title, and we're gonna do some cross-site scripting here. So we're just gonna do an alert OK. So we're just gonna try and hack the blog, and again we're not redirecting here, so it's just taking us to the empty post.zimple. So in our view it would be nice if we had here, instead of render created, we do a redirect to blogs. So that'll be a bit nicer. But then if we go to our blogs, we've got our spam. You can see that it's also been sanitized for us as well. So we're not at risk of, well, less risk of cross-site scripting there. So that's automatically done by Zimple. Now, one final thing that I think would be quite nice to do, it would be nice if we could render some markdown. So we'll just do that here. So we're going to go to our get, and we're just going to render this markdown dynamically because we can also do it on insert, but we're going to do it on get just so it's a bit easier to manage. But if you really care about performance, you could render it when you create the record in the database and store the markdown separately. Typical stuff there. So we've got our blog entry. Now we're going to modify this. So I'm going to do const render markdown. We're going to use Jetzig to do this for us. And we're going to pass it the request to allocator and the content. So this is going to be blog.content and just some empty default options there. Okay, and then we're going to try and put in that into the template data. So we've got our markdown. We'll just call it markdown, and we'll put render markdown there. Cool. Just put a comma there to make it a bit prettier to look at. Okay, so we've taken the content here. We're going to render it. So we're going to assume that it's markdown. And then we're going to make that available in the template data so that it can just render it directly. So if we go back into our get simple, so instead of rendering the content, we're just going to do dot markdown. Cool. And again, that matches root.put markdown, the rendered markdown, and just going to make sure we know what the compiler is. Cool, that seems to be going fine. And yeah, we're just going to display it directly here. And then that allows us to just type in some markdown, have that automatically rendered, which is quite convenient. And by the way, if you're using Vim or NeoVim, you can go to github.com Jetzig-framework symbol.vim, and we've got syntax highlighting, which I'm using here. So if you want to use that, just feel free to download that and install it. If you want to contribute for another editor, feel free to do that as well. Okay, so that should be all ready, and then we can go and look at that. So that's going to be pretty identical. See, this is now, of course, yeah. So what we need to do here is we need to do simple.format.raw, simple.get markdown. So we need to bypass Zimple's sanitization, because now at this point we have complete control over what we're putting in here, so we don't need to worry about it too much. If you're adding things like comments to your blog, then you're going to need to have some kind of sanitization there in place for that. You're going to have to decide whether you want to do markdown or not. But in this case, yeah, we just want to just render the markdown raw, because if we've got control to our blog post, and we're going to assume that we're not going to be doing any kind of XSS stuff. We render that again. There we go. Cool. So now we're going to just do one more blog entry. Cool. And we're going to put some markdown in. So title, and then some blog items, and then Jetzig website. submit that. Okay, and then see what we've got. There we go. Now we've got some markdown, we've got a link, put images in there, and so on and so on. So there you go, you've got a pretty simple blogging application. We're not going to cover things like relations. If you look through the Jetzig website, you can go to the documentation and go to database, and there's a tutorial here, and you can follow through that, and this shows you how to do some basics. And then if you want to do more advanced stuff, like for example doing relations and associations, then there's documentation on all of this kind of stuff here, and it shows you how to set all of this up. So feel free to have a look through that. If you feel like there's anything missing, then feel free to give us a shout. You can get us on Discord, so feel free to come and join us there, and let us know how you're getting on. Cool, so just before we wrap up, just want to point out a few things here. So make sure that you've gone to the Zig website, and if you want to give them some money to help with the project, you can go to the Zig Software Foundation button here and click on sponsor, or find out how to donate. And also needs to say a big thank you to Karl, who has designed pg.zig, which is the database driver that we're using with JetQuery. So that's the adapter that we're using to connect to Postgres, and it handles all of the clever low-level stuff. And as you can see, he's an extremely prolific developer. He's also written http.zig, which is also the backend for Jetzig, the HTTP server that we use. This is where we get all of the performance gains that we get from there. Go to openmymind.net if you want to check out his website. Loads of cool stuff. If you want to learn Zig, loads and loads of really useful information there. Okay, cool. That's about it. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye-bye.